Welcome once again to the Druid High Performance podcast. Today we are going to continue our look at martial arts and self-development, this time focusing on grappling arts. So Druid High Performance podcast is a podcast about performance, longevity, health and empowerment. We look at martial arts, we look at Qigong, we look at performance psychology. In this podcast, I'm going to convince you of why you should engage with grappling martial arts, not just for self-defense, but for the preservation and development of mind, body, and health. So please like and subscribe if these topics sound of interest to you. So martial arts in broad terms can be divided between striking arts and grappling arts. Grappling arts, they tend to focus on locks, chokes, and takedowns. As with the previous podcast, we will look at martial arts in a broad sense as a physical method of refinement and development. Now, it's my view that mind and body for most people has never been further apart. In the past, people were obviously a lot more engaged actively with what they were doing during their working time. There was no computers. Even if you take someone who was working in an office back in the day, they were still handwriting all they were writing down. There was a lot more embodiment there, and I think a lot of the problems that people face today can be attributed in some regard towards this separation of mind and body. Now, what do I mean by that? If you're actively thinking constantly about solving different problems and issues, but you lie idle, to me that can be a detriment. Now, do we know the depth of that? Hard to measure, hard to say, but it seems to me, previously we looked at a podcast and there's such a thing as movement therapy, not to bring up the topic in that one too much, but exercise has a benefit on the body and physical health and the reaction that happens when we exercise, but there is something else going on as well, something we don't quite understand, and my view is it's related to this activity. It feels good, it benefits our emotional state. It's not just that we do some exercise and our body gets stronger and lungs and heart get better at transporting oxygenated blood and so on. It's fun, it's deeper than that. The body likes to move. With martial arts, you're giving a specific frame to work within, a style that you're going to practice. It might be that there's competition, so there's rules. Maybe there is no competition, but there is a philosophy that how you approach controlling or submitting an opponent or outstriking them, whatever the martial art happens to be. So who can benefit from training in martial arts? Well, I believe anyone can benefit. We live in a physical and dangerous world. Most people like to think otherwise, but it's not the case. Training in martial arts is great for confidence. It helps you to understand that facet of life and to think, what would you do if you were required to defend yourself? Now, as I say, a lot of people don't. Fukuyama said we live in the end of history, and people take that to be we live in a time now where all your problems can be resolved by the state. You don't really need to have any sort of autonomy in any sense. You can just walk around like a happy-go-lucky character and you won't be required to defend yourself, act on your own behalf in physical terms, because that's a lie. The end of history view. There's a reason that confidence is associated with martial arts is because in the animal kingdom, if you have low status male, for example, and you're weaker than all of your contemporaries, then you're up against it, aren't you? You're going to be riddled with stress, you're going to be uncertain, you're going to be anxious, you're going to be unassertive, and you're going to be well down the pecking order. So what is the difference between a striker and a grappler? Not just in the pure sense of what they do as in the training they do, but what is the kind of different mindset, the different effect of practicing these arts? Obviously, some people do both, and how does that affect them? One of the biggest differences is that a striker, a lot of what they do is based around the sense of vision. In the clinch, obviously, there is a bit of feel there. And you can even observe people who are strikers, but you can sense that it's a very much of a feel game for them, like Roberto Duran, always getting his hands on his opponent, always trying to manipulate and control them. But in the sense of a long distance striker, there isn't that chance to kind of parry and get in so easily. We're talking like a purely visual. So getting your hands on someone, and controlling them, it's a thing that we all did as kids, or most of us did. The vast majority of us will wrestle around with their dad, siblings if they have them. It's just one of those natural things. And it does build confidence, and it does build a toughness, it does build a playfulness. Now, what's quite interesting is that in the Eastern tradition of martial arts, two of the biggest styles are Jiu-Jitsu and Judo. For people that don't know, both of those styles, the name refers to soft. Soft is the operative word. Gentle. The gentle art, the soft art, the smooth art. Art suave is the term used in Portuguese in Brazil. But in Japanese that translates Judo and Jiu-Jitsu as gentle art, gentle way, so on and so forth. Which is maybe surprising for people which have never trained in martial arts, because if you were to watch a Judo match in the Olympics or Jiu-Jitsu match, maybe soft wouldn't be the thing that jumped out. But it's the philosophy of the art, which is interesting in the sense that it's essentially about finding the perfect counter to your opponent, if you like, in theory. Now, obviously, a lot of people play an aggressive style of Judo and Jiu-Jitsu, and so it's hard to see that, but it is kind of fundamental to the art. Whereas different grappling styles will take a completely opposite approach, even in pure terms. Now, you might have an aggressive Judo player, but they still have the ability to receive energy and create throwing opportunities out of those, whereas catch wrestling, and more specifically wrestling, especially freestyle wrestling, it's the explosive action of the takedown, the shot. Shooting in and taking an opponent down isn't about yielding and unbalancing an opponent, it's literally blasting through them. And so we spoke in the previous episode about opposing forces, this idea of applying yin and yang to these art forms. And in striking terms, we discussed that these opposing forces can be used to create more accurate, powerful strikes, but also more efficient. So we can throw with great power, but the more balanced we are and the more our non-striking hand kind of comes towards us to create a structure in our technique, there's great benefit and refinement there. And the same is there obviously with grappling. So you have these two sort of opposing forces as we speak of. One is energetically exploding out from the center away from us, if you like, and the more receptive energy moves towards us in broad terms. And that's the wonder of this analogy, this model, if you like. So if we think of the real application of that idea of gentle art, it's that complete yin energy. It's receiving the impact and rolling with it. Sort of the completion of the cycle. Someone moves in and attacks you with this expanding energy and you receive it and then misdirect it. It's very, people love to reference that in relation to Aikido and other styles, talking about it if you have like a debate between two people, and verbal Judo, verbal Jiu-Jitsu. And people like that idea of overcoming superior aggression and force with clean technique. But of course, at the very top level of Jiu-Jitsu, it's not so philosophical, because these people are incredibly well conditioned, incredibly fit and strong, and they can't both be defensive. So there is that offense. And this is when we talk about the expanding yang energy, this opposing forces. And the extreme version of that is, as I say, wrestling, that aggressive shot in. Now we've also got another dichotomy within grappling, which isn't so much there in the striking. You can be in the striking realm, you can be on top. You can, in a sense that you're dominating, you're winning, you're controlling the distance, the tempo, etc. But it's different in grappling terms because you've got the top player, the guy on top controlling most of the time, looking to pass guard, moving to improve to a better position before they attack their pins and their submissions. Or you have the guard player, the bottom player. And that obviously feeds into the opposing forces idea, because usually the person on top is the one expending the energy in a sense that they are trying to kind of crush their opponent, I suppose, outmaneuver them, pin them, look to submit them. You're opposing your force on someone. In a basic sense, it's not always black and white as that, but the guard player is sort of receiving that control, receiving that energy and using their skill to either lock up submissions or control purely, or to sweep and then get themselves on top. So there's this back and forth, top versus bottom. There's different philosophies for each side of the game. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they've got more guards than you can think of, different ways of locking up the opponent, attacking submissions. Whereas top game is, I suppose, a little bit more basic in approach, whereas a great wrestler doesn't have all the submission game a jiu-jitsu person has, but they might just be able to just crush this jiu-jitsu guy with their top position, their base as they call it. So they talk about in jiu-jitsu, sometimes you're the hammer, sometimes you're the nail. And this can relate to these top and bottom positions, because obviously some people have got wicked guards, wicked bottom games, and being in their guard is just no fun, and you're just getting thrown all over the place or just straight up submit. But there's a difference when someone's very good on top and your little puny guard is getting crushed. That's a feeling every grappler has had and will continue to have. You come across some people and their base is ungodly, you cannot move them, cannot control them, and they can just smash through anything you can do and will likely submit you over and over and over. It's a painful one, but the dichotomy, the difference, and obviously early doors in jiu-jitsu or grappling terms, my experience is mostly in jiu-jitsu, so I think we'll best keep it in that. When you find your sweet spot will either be one or the other in your earlier belts, and then as you get a bit into more advanced belts, you're looking to kind of hold up the gaps, learn to have a more diversified game in all areas of your game, but obviously if you're a guard player, you need to learn to use top game and vice versa. And like with everything, you get to a kind of mediocre level. You've got the basic handle, the basic elements of the game. Now you have to kind of take it a bit further and start to iron out your game, get some ideas about what's happening in the areas you're not so comfortable with. And it's there is this argument within the grappling world, if you like, of wrestling versus jiu-jitsu, because they're not the same. To people who haven't trained, it might seem that they are very similar, and they are very similar, but there is key differences. So from wrestling, predominantly in its most basic idea, is looking to take someone to the floor or stop someone else taking them to the floor. So obviously wrestling can be used offensively and defensively. But defensive wrestling is not the same as jiu-jitsu. It's very different. Being able to stop someone taking you down requires sort of a systematic approach of problem solving, switching between the correct way to ward off the takedown attempts which are coming your way, or obviously putting that on someone else. And it takes a certain mindset, especially to shoot double legs, because you really need to physically blast through someone. You need to be kind of through their hips before they've even reacted. And that takes basically an assertiveness physically. Because if you go in there second guessing when you're shooting a double leg, you will get crushed into the mat. You'll be the one getting crushed. So wrestling is probably the most exhausting sport around. If you've ever wrestled someone, 5-minute wrestling match can make pretty much anything else look pretty tame. You'll be puffing, blowing up after that. The reason wrestlers are so tough is because the training required to do what they do has to prepare them for this. You're literally grappling with another person. And it's tough, hard work. Whereas jiu-jitsu, it's not so much about opposing your game on them so much. Compared to wrestling, it's a very different game. Jiu-jitsu, kind of looking to attack submissions. These can be from anywhere, standing or on the mat, from top or from the bottom. Whereas wrestling, it's getting that person to the mat, putting them down, pinning them down. Now, jiu-jitsu isn't so focused on conditioning. It can't be. So compared to wrestlers, jiu-jitsu players can be considered a little bit lazier. And you'll see this in MMA matches where you have, this is years ago when I guess these were more prevalent. Now it's a bit more well-rounded MMA, so it's not so much wrestling versus jiu-jitsu matches, but you still get this idea come through. Whereas in the first round, the jiu-jitsu guy is throwing up submissions and keeping up with the wrestling guy, and this is in the example, obviously, where the jiu-jitsu judge doesn't just submit the wrestler straight away, but the elite wrestlers, the ones with good submission defense, there would be examples when they would outlast, they just put a pressure on their opponent and just kind of break them. Because wrestling breeds that mindset, a toughness. Jiu-jitsu is a bit more of a trickiness, especially if you're a submission artist. Wrestler, it's a domineering style of combat, if you like. Whereas jiu-jitsu, it could have that same sort of dominating style, but it always looking to aim with a submission. So it is different, and it's not so effective in the takedowns because you can't really get better at taking people down than a great wrestler. Comes with the territory. Where jiu-jitsu, you're trying to, maybe you get someone down, but you're looking to pin and move to a dominant position to finish with submission. Now, in the act of doing these arts, so obviously we're talking today not just about these arts, but their effect on us as a sort of form of self-development. The confidence that comes from wrestling is different from the confidence that comes from jiu-jitsu. Now, for people that don't train, that sounds strange because maybe the distinction between the two isn't so obvious, but from what we've just been discussing, wrestling is about blasting through. There's more to it than that, but that's a big element to it. It's about sort of seeing that obstacle and going through it. Whereas jiu-jitsu is sort of working with the obstacle. As I say, the jiu-jitsu is the smooth art, the soft art, whereas wrestling is literally, out-wrestle your opponent. So if the basic strategy, the basic art form, if it could be, the philosophy of it could be boiled down to 2, 3, 4 words, wrestling is take opponent down, control, pin. Whereas jiu-jitsu, as I say, is work with opponent, control, submit. And just in those short descriptors, although there is a lot of crossover, there is a difference. And you obviously, like with everything, you get strikers and grapplers, so they have a dual philosophy, and you have people which are great wrestlers and have got great submission skills, and so that they also have both of these ideas. And when they put these together, well, you've got a heck of an opponent on your hands. So if you thought about taking up grappling art, which of those sounds, if you were to say to yourself, this year I'm going to heed Drew's advice, I'm feeling like I need something to boost my confidence, give me something to develop myself physically, build myself up in a sense. I want to do something to develop myself, and I'm not active enough, and modern world has me sitting around looking at screens all day. I need something which is going to kick me up the backside. Which then of these two arts do you think will be the one for you? Wrestling, that controlling, that blasting through obstacles, or is it the jiu-jitsu, the working with the obstacle, outmaneuvering that obstacle and that opponent, and ending with control and submission? So a valuable question, because at the end of these podcasts, if you listen to these both, do you think, do I want to do martial arts? Do I heed the point that training in martial arts will be a benefit to me? And if I was to, what art am I going to practice? What am I going to grapple? Am I going to do some striking? If I do grapple, is it going to be wrestling, or is it going to be jiu-jitsu? Is it going to be both? Have I got the time to do both? So there is a style of martial arts which is worth talking about in the grappling realm. And it's interesting because it leads onto what we're talking about. It's called Sambo. It comes out of Russia. Some famous MMA fighters, Fedor Emelianenko, Habib Nurmagomedov, Islam Makhachev, all these guys practice Sambo. Now, what's Sambo? Well, Sambo is a Russian form of judo. It's equipped with the takedowns from wrestling, that explosive, domineering spirit of wrestling. They have the throws and the off-balancing of judo in the stand-up game, but they also have excellent submissions, and in Sambo they actually have striking as well, striking into the takedown, but we'll talk about that a bit later. And so the fact that their submission skills are excellent and their takedowns are excellent is interesting, because you don't tend to have both of those. Don't tend to have great takedown artists who are excellent submission artists. There are a few, but Sambo seems to produce these quite well, because it's boiled into the art form. So wrestling and jiu-jitsu, if we had 5 words, we've come up with those broadly. Sambo, it's takedown, it's throw, it's submit, it's all these things, and it's striking too. So it's like an MMA prototype. It's like the perfect art form to create an excellent MMA fighter. And it's not a surprise that some of the greatest to ever do the sport come from that art, because it's a prototype. It's all in there before MMA was even a thing. There's a great fight to show this is Khabib versus Rafael dos Anjos. Great Brazilian MMA fight. He was a jiu-jitsu black belt. Obviously trains a lot of stand-up striking, puts it all together very well, puts a pace on people, fights out of southpaw stance. So they fight, and Khabib puts the pressure on him in the wrestling and takes him down. First round, he takes him down. Second round, they strike a bit. Dos Anjos isn't really able to land anything too punishing on Khabib. Khabib big, back and forth, they get some shots in. Khabib gets a takedown in the first round. The second round comes out. Third round, there's a very memorable part when Dos Anjos gets in on Khabib and he's looking to take him down. He's looking to take the Sambo champion down, because he's been getting taken down, and he shoots, and he's looking to take him down against the cage. And from there, Khabib steps across and judo throws him, basically. And it's like a dream, If you've ever done judo or jiu-jitsu and you're trying to hit throws, it's an easier said than done, hitting a good throw on someone. But to do it against a world-class opponent, stepping across and lands controlled, Sambo gives you that versatility to be able to do that. If you're excellent at it. Fedor's done the same sort of thing. He can take people down many which way with these great throws, but he can also counter other people's wrestling with this unbalancing style of judo. Amazing to observe, amazing to see. Maybe you're lucky enough to live in an area where they teach Sambo, and being able to take people down and use these throws and learn submission skills, you feel would be good for your development, and will help you move forward and develop your character, and it would. And if you're lucky enough to have a Sambo school in your area, I'll check it out. So in this broad introduction, we've been talking about a few of the dichotomies that exist within martial arts, the effect on practicing these styles, a few different styles and their differences. And the last thing I'm going to talk about in this part, before we move on to more of a deeper analysis, is this style of catch wrestling. So again, catch wrestling, or rather the gentle art of jiu-jitsu, which is looking for that kind of clean submission, capitalizing on our opponent's reckless aggression. Catch wrestling, which is a wrestling style which also uses submissions, has a hard submission style. And what it means by that is, in their searching for a submission in catch wrestling, a catch wrestler will put their opponent in holds which wears on them, breaks them down, like pinning ankles, like you might pin your opponent down with your knee across their like Achilles, or crushing their ankle, not looking to move past them or submit them with that move, but just to wear on them, break them down. They're excellent at wearing on you, because they got that wrestler's grip, that wrestler's strength, because they can take people down as well. So pure wrestling and pure jiu-jitsu is like two opposite. One is focused on submission, one is focused on takedown control. But we talked about there being this art form of Sambo, which has a balance between that, more in the throwing from judo and the takedown from the wrestling, but also that submission. Whereas catch wrestling It's similar in how we're describing it. It's got the takedowns of, freestyle wrestling, if you like. They've got great throws too, but they've got these submissions. But they don't play the guard. So in catch wrestling, you can't accept bottom position and work from there because it's all about the pin, as well as it's a top game art. Still about control, but it's got this punishing way of breaking an opponent down and then putting submissions on them. Some of the greatest MMA fighters of all time, grapplers, were catch wrestlers. And it's interesting to watch their style versus the sort of meta of jiu-jitsu based or freestyle wrestling based. So if you look at Kazushi Sakuraba, Josh Barnett, you'll see a different approach, a different philosophy, a different style. And it's very interesting to look at. Very, very interesting. So that's a bit of our introduction. So now we're going to look at, we've got all the different types of grappling, and so let people understand differences, and so on and so forth. Now we're going to look at the areas, the very broad strokes. So areas of grappling. We've been talking a lot about wrestling, and they really are the masters of takedowns. So taking your opponent to the mat. Now, there's many ways to skin a cat, as they say. You might look to shoot your takedown, and then your opponent counters that. It's also about defending the opponent's offense. So think about offense and defense for all these areas. So takedowns can consist of double legs, where you wrap both hips, single legs when you control one leg. High crotch is a single leg where you're kind of controlling up around the hip. Takedowns can also include the throws from judo. Obviously in judo you have a gi, so you've got collar grips, you've got wrist grips, and how these work together. So you can get a style of your own together where you have an initial move which gets countered, then you've got something else to move towards, so on and so forth, and your defensive sequences too. So takedowns and throws is one area. We've got 5 areas of grappling. Takedowns and throws, number 1. I mean, some jiu-jitsu schools don't focus as much on takedowns as other styles, whereas wrestling, that's largely all they do. Judo, a lot of what they'll do is that whereas jiu-jitsu, they're going to spend a lot more time doing the other 4. So you've got takedowns, judo, wrestling, very focused on these. Jiu-jitsu a little less. Sambo, very much focused on these. Catch wrestling focused on these. Passing guard. Now, what do we mean by passing guard? If you don't know, you've taken your opponent down, but they're able to get their legs involved and defend themselves with their legs, with their arms, their body. They're able to hold you or keep you away from controlling them. So in that case, you as the top player don't want to just take someone down and be kept away. You want to get past the opponent's legs, control their upper body, and pin them to the mat. So then you can get your offense going. Now there's an awful lot of different ways of passing the guard. There's also the counters to this on when you've been taken down, retaining guard. Now obviously wrestling doesn't spend so much time passing the guard. They might do a bit of it. Judo, they have a bit of it. Sambo, they maybe do quite a lot. Obviously jiu-jitsu, it's a major part of a top player's game is passing guard, because in jiu-jitsu you're awarded points for passing guard. To win, you will need to score more points or submit your opponent. And so passing guard is just, essential to that process. Now sweeps take place on the ground when you're able to counter your opponent's guard passes and keep them in your guard, and then that's obviously part of the opposite side of passing guard, if you like. Well, sweeps are the ability to go from being on bottom, being taken down and controlled, if you like, to be able to sweep your opponent over, and then now you're the top player. In wrestling, they'll learn to sweep over their opponent, but in wrestling, you do not accept the guard position. So there is a subtle difference, the guard being when you're on your back. So in jiu-jitsu, they have a very deep, and there's all different guards, and from these guards, all the different sweeps you can imagine. So as I say, that jiu-jitsu has a large repository of moves for sweeps. Wrestling, not as many, but they still do have to work on sweeping their opponents over. Judo, they sweep their opponents. So that's 3 of 5 areas of grappling. Area number 4, submissions. As I said before, catch wrestling has like a hard style of submission, which is just about wearing on you, whereas jiu-jitsu is more about the clean submission. Yeah, there's a grey over, there's crossover there, but as a basic point, you could take that one. Jiu-jitsu, you will find some of those guys are masters of submission, an in-depth knowledge of chokes, arm locks. You'd probably say that people who do the best chokes jiu-jitsu, you would argue. Maybe joint locks. Catch wrestlers have got some great shoulder locks, but you would give the edge to jiu-jitsu for submission. I think that's pretty fair. You'd be hard-pressed for someone to argue with that, I would say. And the final point, escapes. Escaping bad positions and submissions. So submission defense is a facet of the game, especially in jiu-jitsu, as well as catch wrestling, because that's the way you win, isn't it? And so you, as a grappler, you will have to divide your time between these five. Some arts, as we've discussed, will focus on some of these and others, but the balance of areas that you have to practice is great because there's a lot to learn. There's a lifetime to attempt to master it, which you'll never will. You've got a lot to work with, a lot of different areas. Whereas striking, there's offense, there's defense, there's punching, there's kicking, there's moving, there's different strategic ideas. But it's different in the sense that grappling, you have these five areas, and they are very much more defined. They are very defined. And so you've got more of a library to fall into, to explore. Both are very deep and endless, but endless in different ways. So we will touch again on the 5-element theory, which we discussed last podcast. For a more in-depth look at the 5-element theory, I guide you to the previous podcast, episode 8, on striking martial arts. This is like a learning model, using the elements from antiquity as a learning idea. And it's very useful. And we'll look a little bit more specifically today about grappling. We're not going to go into great length, but it's a nice a chance to recap and revise that. And then we're going to move on to looking at the 7 animal theory and applying that to grappling, as we are with the element theory. So the 5-element theory states that the first stage of learning is obviously low resolution because you're a beginner. It's not very accurate. It's very kind of broad, very much movement based. And that's why it's water. Water, if you've observed a river, it runs. It runs down its course. It's fluid. It's movement based. And as I say, it's not the most accurate thing. And it's not particularly tense. And so when you're learning jiu-jitsu or wrestling, you don't want to be putting all your force into it at this low stage, this early stage. Well, you will a little bit because you're reckless and you're new. But this inaccuracy, this lack of refinement is obvious because you're a beginner. Low resolution. You know, every technique you will learn, you're going to do it at a remedial level because you are new. You know, shoot a takedown, you might get them down. It's a touch sloppy because you're brand new to it. We're not there at a stage we're able to employ that accurate technique yet. So when you're gripping a collar, it's a general grip. You're not sure where the best place to grip is. You're stepping across to do your throw. You're not exactly sure where the leg goes, where the best place to put that is. When you're trying to pass guard, there's all these little mistakes you're making. It's because it's low resolution. We're doing it in a general sense so we can get an approach, an idea. Now as we move through the model, we'll move into the second stage, earth. Now earth is very much here. It's not there. Water's bubbling around all over the place. It's inaccurate. It's fluid, movement-based. Earth, there's no movement. It's about that stop. It's about that sharp accuracy. It's also about power. So if water is bubbling through, low resolution, earth is about applying force accurately. So it's not reckless. And when I was making that grip, when I was a beginner, I wasn't quite gripping the right place. I wasn't quite using the right strength, pulling in the right direction. But now I'm getting a basic idea. I've got a better idea of where I need to grip. I've got a better idea of where to pull with that grip. And when I try to finish that choke, I'm more aware of what I'm actually doing. Here, these carotid arteries, I want my arm across both of those, I close off the space, or when I shoot my takedown, my shoulder is in their waist, knocking their hips backward so I can disrupt their weight, take them down. So it's a bit sharper, a lot sharper. Next one is wind wood. So this next element, wind and wood, both are used interchangeably, and they are basically, in one sense, the combination of this fluid motion and this staticness, this sharpness of earth. So water and earth combined into wind and wood, but also they bring this erratic spiraling back and forth. If water moves one way, it moves back the other way. It's like a wave, of course, whereas earth isn't moving at all, solid. Whereas where, if you observe a storm at night, and it's really howling, the wind's whipping up, and you see a tree caught in the wind, it's not moving like water flowing one way than the other. It's moving erratically all over the place. Apply those movements to the principles of attack and defense. So this is it's a conceptual idea. How do we apply these initial techniques which we learnt in a low resolution fashion, these submissions, these sweeps, these guard passes, these escapes, these takedowns, these counters to these? We learnt these in a general sense in low resolution, then we sharpened them up, we got accurate with them, and we were able to apply power to do these at a better and better rate. How then can we implement them in a sense of attack and defense? When we're attacking an opponent, or when we're receiving an attack, how we defend ourselves. And as a tree is caught up in the wind, when you've got two people engaging in grappling, sometimes the tree is getting pushed all day and all night to the left. Sometimes one particular player is the hammer for the whole match, and then with 30 seconds to go, here comes the other. It's that ebb and flow. Water is just flow, earth is just ebb. Wind, wood, it's that erratic ebb and flow of attack and defense, for give and take. And that's what we're learning when we get to this third level. How do we respond to these situations? How do we attack and then be foiled and then attack again, and foiled and then attack again? How do we switch from position to position? How do we switch from defense into attack? How do we apply these low resolution and more accurate moves later on to best defend ourselves, to best attack, so on and so forth? It's actually about applying what we've learned in those first two stages and how best to apply those. Now, the next stage is fire. Fire, if you remember from the previous podcast, is a lot to do with the mind. So the water, the body is moving in a fluid sense, and the earth is using the right type of power and accurate use of these techniques we've been taught. And so now with wind wood, there's this integration of mind and body together to make attack and defense. Fire is this overarching, it's purely the thought process. It's beyond the physical at that point. It's about the strategy. How do I achieve my aims through all these techniques that I've been taught? It goes into specifics, it goes into more general terms. How do we attack this opponent? How do we attack this tournament? How do we win this game? And the strategy will apply to all the areas we talked about, to how do I take my opponent down, or how do I defend my opponent's takedowns? How do I submit them? What methods of attack can help me to counter their approach? How can I sweep? How can I counter their great sweep? How can I escape their submissions? How can I counter their escapes? We know their submission defense is excellent. We know that they roll out of a certain choke a certain way, and we can punish that because strategically we've been looking. We saw them in a previous match. They did it a certain way. This is what it is to be strategic, to study that opponent and different types of opponent, and so on and so forth. So metal is the final stage for water, earth, wind, wood, fire, metal. Metal's this final stage, and that means integration. Putting it all together, learning to be more water again, going back through the cycle and being more fluid again, even like you were when you were a beginner. So it's low resolution as we go back through, but it's because you've been through the cycle, it's more specific, more applied. So we have to take a look again at the basic things that we were taught on the first day, and then we need to sharpen up those again. We'll probably do that through teaching people which are coming through, new students, because then when your teacher turns to you and says, and you take one of these beginners through this, you really think to yourself, ooh, I need to sharpen up my game to make sure I'm teaching them the right thing, because there's nothing worse than teaching a white belt when you're more of a senior student and you're really unsure. So I don't want to go into the weeds with that one too much, but just the idea of applying that 5-element theory to the 5 areas: submissions, takedowns, guard passing, sweeps, and escapes. So that's clear. So moving on, last podcast we looked at something called the 7-animal theory, or it's 7-animal style. It's a theory within martial arts, and we looked at it specifically in the last podcast as relates to strikings, punching and kicking. And what we're going to look at that today, of course, is the grappling equivalent. We're just going to get straight into it. So Tiger, always a good place to start. It's very primal, very aggressive style. In the striking, it hits with full power. In the grappling sense, it really has to do with sort of crushing top pressure. So in grappling terms, you're either on the top position or bottom position. And when we're thinking Tiger, we're not really thinking about playing a tricky guard. We're thinking about crushing our opponent with lots of pressure, heavy, punishing style. And also the same applies to passing guard. In Jui Jitsu, there is this idea of pressure passing, and that is applying so much pressure on the opponent, crushing them up, stacking them, that you don't actually pass, they give up the pass. So quite a demoralizing and, as I say, aggressive style of grappling. And it really wilts people, really takes it out of them, and really gives them nowhere to go, really. People like to play guard, they like to throw up submissions. Well, this Tiger application is punishing that, and it's just shaking off submissions and just passing through this heavy, low weighted style of passing, and it's very punishing, as I say. Another aspect is hanging on. When caught in submissions, Tigers are very stubborn. They keep going when they really probably shouldn't keep going, and this can kind of manifest in sort of this grit and determination once caught in a choke, or maybe some sort of lock where maybe they should submit there, but they kind of they get out of it just through pure force of will. I mean, obviously, if you don't submit to certain submissions, you actually get injured. But this is sort of a little bit how the game is played on this Tiger aspect. Also, we can think about sprawling in the wrestling. So when someone's shooting in on yourself, one way to deal with that is just to slam your hips down, sprawling. And this is a very heavy motion. It can be a very crushing motion. If you kind of go in half-hearted with a takedown and someone's pancake sprawls you into the mat, you'll never forget it, because, you're crushed. It's a heavy weight. It's very demoralizing. It's a very direct approach to dealing with someone trying to take you down. It's just using that weight and that kind of aggressive, dominating spirit about it. And like with striking, Tiger works in a kind of vertical sense. In the striking, everything is going down to the floor, in that it's heavy. So when you stand forward and you strike, there's the body weight behind it. Well, that applies also with the grappling. So there's this vertical direction. It's all kind of going down into the floor. It's just everything's heavy, punishing style, full of aggression. And we'll move on to one of the more subtle animals now, and that's crane. So Tiger's very aggressive. Crane is very stoic, you could say, very calm and relaxed. It's also very defensively minded. So while Tiger is very heavy and crushing, Crane is sort of very aware of the opponent's offense and looking to kind of defeat that before it gets going. So it's always cognizant, this Crane style of approach to grappling, of the opponent's strengths. It's got a very systematic insight into the defensive elements of grappling. So it knows how to, this Crane stylist knows how to deal with certain submissions, certain moves. It knows the counters. It's very studied. Tiger, it's maybe not as reflective in its approach, and it doesn't really think too deeply about it. It just uses these aggressive, crushing style of grappling to deal with most of the situations it finds itself. Whereas Crane, it studies, It understands certain submissions, certain takedowns, certain vulnerabilities, and it looks to use a studied approach to counter that. So that works with submissions, also with takedown defense, as I say. It also applies a very clean technique, whereas Tiger uses a lot of force. Crane is very much focused on using just enough force to get the job done. So trying to be certainly efficient in any of the submissions. When I think of Crane, I don't think so much of chokes, or I think more of joint locking. In the grappling side of Kung Fu, they do a lot of arm locks, and ones which are very kind of long fist, if you like, some extended arm positions in the locking. Well, if we apply that to the ground in jiu-jitsu terms, it really makes me think of arm bars, knee bars, some choking perhaps, some choking technique, but this joint locking seems to ring true. And when we come to the takedown side of things, the wrestling side, it really makes me think of single leg attacks. And this, in the wrestling sense, is you can go a double leg where you kind of wrap your arms around both hips, whereas the single leg is you would just attack one leg and look to off balance your opponent by turning them this way and that and trying to trip and throw them. So it's not about this power to take them down, which we're going to look at next with the Leopard. It's more this kind of understanding of technique and balance and looking to turn your opponent this way and that, and not using brute force or strength. It's more this sort of considered and studied approach to grappling. Again, it's vertical because it can expand up and down. So Tiger's always working to the floor. It's very heavy. Crane can use these joint locking techniques where it goes up to the sky. Also, it can take that single leg and lift it up high and then look to take the opponent to the floor using a bit of an angle change. It's not explosive in anything it does. As I say, very, very studied approach. So Leopard, we think of explosive takedowns. And when we say explosive, there's an element of speed. Tiger has that aggression, that crushing top pressure. But it's not particularly fast, whereas Leopard is very explosive. And it has that same sort of ruggedness as Tiger, maybe not quite as forceful, but it's still pretty forceful. And a lot how that manifests in the grappling is through this classic explosive double leg takedown from wrestling, where we kind of dip our weight down and we literally tackle that person. We kind of explode right through them. Takes a lot of power and strength and speed to achieve that. You need to get in on your opponent's hips before they have a chance to really react with that sprawl that we've been talking about. But Leopard is speed, explosiveness, and how that manifests in grappling a lot is this explosive takedown, this double leg takedown. Also, if we're looking at passing our opponent's guard, their defensive position, using their body, their limbs, prevent us from getting to dominant position, Leopard uses this in a different way to the Tiger. The Tiger uses this pressure passing, this heavy weight, this demoralizing, crushing attempt at passing, whereas Leopard will try and get purchase on the opponent's guard and then look to kind of rip one way and the other. So it's using this explosive rotation to get from one side to another and get to a dominant position. And there's a whole kind of system of guard passing in jiu-jitsu which uses this sort of leg drag position, whereas the opponent's on their back, you're standing over them, you're trying to get past their legs to get to a dominant position. You get hold of one leg and we're using this explosive rotational action to get past the legs and then get to a dominant position. And it's sort of similar but not the same as power punching. This kind of rotational force, obviously it will look very different if you look at someone using explosive passing with rotation, and then you look at someone doing combination punching. They're quite different acts, but there is a similarity in this core rotational, explosive core rotation for both of those. And that's what we think of Leopard in this passing position. Also, Leopard is very studied in that it uses combination attacks. It predicts, it kind of plans out, not as much as the Crane perhaps, but a lot more than the Tiger. Tiger comes forward and does what it does. Crane has got a studied approach and it looks to have answers to all these different problems, all these different questions. Leopard is more offensive. It has a plan in that it's going to have combination attack. It goes one way, then it goes the other way. It attacks for a choke and then it drops for a leg lock. It goes for the arm bar, then it switches to the other arm. This sort of kind of lateral approach is very much this Leopard idea of I attack here, but really I'm opening up this left channel. I'm attacking to the right, but really I'm looking to go left. This is a big part of the approach of Leopard. It's quite studied. It's planning. It's planning out what it's looking to do. Crane also does so, but it's there is a different feel there. One's more aggressive. The Leopard is way more aggressive than the Crane, and the Tiger, of course, is just all-out aggression. Moving again over to Snake, which is more about subtlety. So if we've got this explosive takedowns and guard passing of the Leopard and a combination attacks, with the Snake we've got a subtle control, subtle wrapping of our opponent. Maybe we're looking to isolate a limb or set up a choke. Snake has this idea, this very slicker attempt at controlling opponents and snatching up any mistakes that our opponents might make. Obviously, if we're trying to get under the chin to get a choke on our opponent, this idea of the snake is purpose built for this, because they constrict. The way they wrap around branches and prey is very much how we would look to wrap around, especially chokes, to close off blood vessels, to attack our opponent in this way and that way. But it does it in a very subtle way. As I say, it's not using a lot of strength and explosiveness. It's about this contraction, this squeeze. That's where the power of Snake comes through. And in the act of pummeling is when, if you and your opponent are chest to chest and you're basically trying to get your arms involved and get underneath your opponent's armpits to control your upper torso. This is the act of pummeling. It's very prevalent in Greco-Roman wrestling, but also when you're grappling in jiu-jitsu terms, you're constantly hand fighting. You're constantly trying to occupy the space under the armpits so you can control your opponent's upper torso. And this snake idea is very, very much about trying to gain that position through subtle manipulation. Now, one thing we haven't talked about is Tiger might be very much about controlling with hands. Leopards too, they have claws. And obviously there is a lot of elements in jiu-jitsu and in grappling where you'll control the wrist, you can control the inner part of the elbow. Snake is kind of trying to subtly roll around there and find the space and control rather than get this wrist control. So Snake has this smooth pummeling, is very good at setting up chokes, very good at subtly controlling and taking the action where it wants to go. It also very smooth transitioning from one position to another with that subtle manipulation, as we talked about. It's also very good at retaining guard. Now, guard is when we're on our back and our opponent's on top of us trying to get to a dominant position. Now, from our guard, we can set up attacks, submissions. We can also set up sweeps. We can also set up sweeps to sweep our opponent onto their backs, and then we can attack them. But also we're looking to retain our guard. So our opponent might get close to passing our guard, passing our legs so they can really dominate the position and attack us with submissions. But we might be able to retain guard, not just retain, but go from slightly hanging on to that guard where we can snake our way back in to get to a more dominant position and then set up another round of attacks, sweeps, submissions. And when I think of Snake, it's got this kind of ability to attack even when it's in a relatively poor position, or retain that position and work its way back up to a more dominant position. Again, with the Leopard, it's working in a lateral sense, so it's working kind of side to side rather than up and down. You think about a snake sliding over the floor, it's going left and right in a coiling fashion rather than the vertical fashion of Tiger and Crane. Now, one thing also with Snake is it's very good with these submissions and chokes in the transition. So it looks to sweep the opponent over. It doesn't quite do so, but then it finds the gap to get round the neck. There's some martial arts and there's jiu-jitsu guys who are really, really good at chokes, and they're very, very good at unbalancing opponents and then locking in this submission, this slick, subtle way of attacking the neck when their opponent's not ready for it. So now we're on to Monkey. Now, Monkey and grappling go hand in hand. Obviously, if you've got the agility and the scrambling ability of a monkey, then you're going to grapple quite well, and it's quite easy to see when you see two kind of lighter weight grapplers go at it and they're really rolling around and attacking each other with submissions and takedowns and so on. It's easy to see that kind of monkey playfulness but agility in action. So one thing we haven't talked about so much, which Monkey really emphasizes, is escapes. So escapes are when you're in a bad position or even caught in a submission. That ability to get out of that situation and get back to a neutral position. Obviously, having great agility and scrambling can allow you to do that. When people which are blessed with great agility will always benefit to a point in grappling. Obviously, they still need to study and so on, but that ability to escape through pure agility is very much Monkey, and I think that's pretty obvious to see. Back takes is another thing. Taking the back is one of the most dominant positions in Jiu-Jitsu. It's a really good position, obviously, to attack chokes. And I don't know, when you see someone who's a master at taking the back, there is this sort of Monkey ability to do so if you see someone doing it very efficiently. It takes the agility and rolling with an opponent to do that when you see it done well. And definitely something we can see when we're looking at a Monkey application in grappling. Another side is the scrambles. We talked about that. The ability to just roll this way, roll that way. You get in a bad position, and instead of accepting that as another style, Monkey can almost get into this situation where it's doing no-handed cartwheels and flips and rolls just to kind of get out of there. And it a lot of them can. Very difficult to hold on to someone who's basically rolling like a ball. And you see this at top levels of the sport. Some people are just excellent at escaping bad positions, and they do it somehow just through pure, it seems, agility. There's probably something more to it than that, but it doesn't seem like they're unpicking their opponent's offensive position like a crane might. It's just literally like it's just going to roll through. Monkey, also this idea of roll inverting, and inverting is basically when your head's on the floor and your hips are in the air, when you're basically upside down. And there's a sense basically when you're attacking someone and they're able to invert, they'll turn themselves upside down, roll along their shoulders. It's really hard to get past their guard, really hard to get past their legs. And people which get very good at this can attack submissions from this sort of upside down position. It's a very agile thing to see and to deal with, and it's a real pain in the neck to deal with also. Also, when we're thinking about retaining guard, as we spoke about, can be done subtly through control, in a snake's sense of the word, but also in the Monkey sense, it can come through pure agility, trickiness. As I say, this inverting can make it very difficult to get behind someone to take their back, or between their legs and their elbows, so we can get to a dominant position. If someone's really good at inverting, rolling upside down, I mean, it's like you see wildlife of videos of monkeys rolling around. I mean, it's they're rolling up this way, they're rolling up that way. It's very, very, very much an agile approach to grappling around, and it's just very obvious to see. The word you're looking for with Monkey is tricky, of course. That's the archetype. They are a trickster. They try to do something a bit flash. They kind of no-handed cartwheel over your guard and roll to your back and do all this sort of stuff. So yeah, we've got these flavors, these archetypes, these psychophysiological archetypes, and they're very useful tools to be able to understand movements and martial arts practice in general, especially grappling as we're looking at today. The final one is Mantis. Now, if you remember from striking, Mantis is strangeness of technique. So we've got sort of the by the book way of doing things, the crane. We've got the aggressive way of doing things, tiger. We've got the explosive way of doing it with a bit of agility too in leopard. We've got the subtle control of snake, and we've got this agility of monkey. Well, Mantis basically is the box which stands outside of all of those. Occasionally when we're playing some sort of game, be it grappling, striking, or anything you like, someone comes along with a different approach, something that was difficult for us to prepare for because it's just so strange. And that's what Mantis is in this formulation, this concept. So strangest of technique. You'll grapple with people which do strange things. They'll sort of do things that you're not supposed to. They'll break the rules, but they'll still get the better of you. And you're like, how is this? And it's difficult to study people like that, but we kind of pigeonhole these people into this Mantis box. Strangest of technique, they sort of break the rules, as I say, or they kind of do strange innovation. So one innovation is a guard called Worm Guard, which is developed by a grappler called Cornelius. And basically what he would do is untuck his lapel. In Jiu-Jitsu, use a gi like a judo kimono. And what he would do is untuck his kimono jacket and it'll wrap that in sort of different sort of way than usual, and use that to kind of go under your legs, tie up your legs, tie up your arms in strange ways. So it's a strange innovation, and this is sort of what we're getting at with this Mantis idea. And it puts you in a position where you don't know how to deal with it. You're not seen it before. You can try and smash your way through it in a tiger sense. You could be trying a defensively minded, subtle approach in crane, but if you've not seen it before, it's very difficult to work that out on the fly. Leopard, again, they'll be very explosive. Could deal with it? Snake, could they subtly control that position before it's locked in? And so on and so forth. So it's Mantis is like this sort of X factor. There's another position called turtle guard, where it's completely when you're turtled up, you're basically belly down and you're trying to close off all space between your hips so that they can't kind of take your back, and protecting your neck basically. And so there was one guy called Eduardo Tellez, I believe his name is, and he developed the turtle guard. Turtle is a position where you get defensively and you don't want to hang around there, but he would hang around there and attack submissions from there. Very, very strange again. So this is classic example of a position when you're in a bad position, you're sort of at disadvantage, but someone takes that position and makes it their own and makes it somewhere of strength for them. So it's another example of how strange ideas can come forward and develop the style of a certain grappling art, or so on and so forth. And this is just another example. So turtle guard. Another is Imanari rolls. Now, Imanari rolls is when if you're dealing with another opponent and you're both stood up looking to maybe strike or looking to grapple even, one of the opponents would basically roll along the ground. He would drop down, roll inverted on his shoulders and wrap up his opponent's leg and attack leg submissions. Now, if you've never seen this before, it's very strange to see, because we have this preconceived idea of what it looks like for people to, compete in combat one-on-one, be it stand-up only or in MMA or a grappling situation. But an Imanari roll is slightly strange to observe. You're dealing with another person, especially it could be in an MMA competition. Instead of shooting in and taking them down in sort of this traditional wrestling attempt, or tripping them over, or looking to strike with punching and kicking, you're literally diving on their legs, but in a very sort of upside down fashion, and then landing straight in a position where you can attack leg locks. It is sort of alien. It is sort of strange to see. And if you've never heard of it, never seen it, I'd put Imanari, Imanari, roll into YouTube and check it out. So as I say, strange innovations, unusual escapes or counters as well. So we might see that there's the correct counters or escapes. There's the ones where we see someone who's just gifted with their agility, as we mentioned with the monkey. Mantis might just have a new way of doing it. It might be just this new kind of meta on how someone escapes a certain submission, maybe attacked with their own, or they counter in a certain way. They might get shot on, so they're defending a takedown, and they have a submission from that position, which they've just worked, and it becomes quite effective. Another element, the last element, which we'll cover on the Mantis, is the sort of ability for the limbs to work almost independently. So one leg's doing one thing, one leg's doing the other. It might be someone's trying to get taken down and they're able to balance on one leg and their leg's up above their head. Meanwhile, they're still kind of fighting the hands and able to defend that takedown. It's almost kind of got this alienness about it, because it's beyond agility, it's beyond strength, it's beyond technique. Some people have just got these strange abilities of balance even. Dragon, as before, is like this integration model. Dragon has two sort of aspects. It has its specific own aspects in classical kung fu, we could say, and that is that it's sort of soft, like the snake, mantis, and crane element. It's not as aggressive as the tiger, leopard, and monkey, but it's got this soft, undulating, watery aspect. It's always kind of getting bigger or smaller. That's one aspect of dragon. This is like this classical idea of dragon going back hundreds and hundreds of years. But at a later date in kung fu, they came up with this concept of the 7 animal style, which we're discussing today. And in that aspect, dragon is more to do with the integration of the other 6 animals. So it's how all these things integrate to make someone even more capable, because they're able to wear these other 6 animals as skins. They're able to unconsciously roll between the aggression of tiger, the calm, defensively minded crane, the explosive leopard, and planning leopard as well. Explosive but planning leopard. The subtle and squeezing snake, the agile and scrambling monkey, and the strange and innovative mantis. Well, imagine you could meld all those elements together into one. You're able to just kind of do all of those together. And you could do that almost in an unconscious sense. You didn't really have to think about it too much. This is what the idea is of Dragon in this 7 animal style. It's a development vector, because we get good at what we're good at, and we sort of have our strengths, but we also have our weaknesses. So we'll sort of gravitate to certain aspects of the animals. You know, we kind of feel like we want to have that crushing top pressure of the tiger. We like to use that pressure passing, and we kind of got a sort of stubborn view of our method of grappling. But we've also got this agility. We've also got this monkey aspect of scrambling, rolling, and trying to invert and do all these things. And so we've got this kind of blend of the aggression and the pressure from the tiger, but we've also got the agility of the monkey. But there's also usually a third wrapped in there. We've got 6 animal styles there. It tends to be people who kind of have a combination of 3, and the other 3 are sort of missing in a sense. And they come in different degrees. You know, one will embody quite a lot, another one a bit less, and then the third one a bit less again. And the other 3 we won't be so naturally inclined to pursue. But what we aim to do as we progress as a martial artist is to incorporate all 6 aspects. Or we might never ever be as comfortable as we are doing those ones as the more natural ones, but we're trying to close the gap there. We're trying to take some aspects and improve these areas, so we've got these we can understand it as well. So when we come across someone who's applying a different style, that the more we're aware of that style, we're more able to counter it. So that is how you could apply the 7 animal style to grappling. You could go on and on about this, because obviously grappling is very deep, and this is a very deep model. But we'll look at some sort of some conflicts and how they kind of play out using some people from the grappling world. We did this last time in the striking world. So crane versus tiger in grappling terms. So examples of these could be Josh Barnett, who's a famous catch wrestler, uses a very crushing pressure style. And also we could use the great Gracie, who's multiple time world champion heavyweight and absolute in Jui Jitsu, and was never submitted in competition past blue belt. So we're talking over a decade of competing at the highest level, and was never submitted. So I take that as sort of an aspect of Crane, this defensively minded, well-studied approach. So of all the great people he's grappled over the years, for 10 years plus, no one was able to submit him, which is just testament to his defense and his sort of studied approach, because that's not an accident. You don't just like tough it out because you get caught with these submission guys. Then you're gonna tap, or you're gonna damage a joint or whatever. So the fact that he was able to keep out of submission for so long shows that he did never stop studying the game, looking at these people coming up doing different attacks. He has to study to be able to counter that effectively. So that's that Crane aspect. Submission, defense, defensively minded, very calm, very relaxed, mentally. So Josh Barnett, as I say, is a catch wrestler. What's a catch wrestler? We mentioned before. It's a type of wrestling where they also are very, very good at submissions, but they're always looking to either submit their opponent or pin their opponent down. Now, one thing which is very interesting about Josh Barnett was he competed against some of the best jiu-jitsu guys in the world some years back in submission only competition on a event called Meta Morris, and he went up against Dean Lister, who was a very successful jiu-jitsu champion. And Dean Lister hadn't been submitted for a long time, similar to Gracie. Great submission defense. And he went up against Josh Barnett, and he was submitted with sort of like it's called, it's like a head and arm position as you hold them down. I can't even remember the name of it now, it's escaping me. But interesting thing from there is in jiu-jitsu, especially Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you're holding a person down, you're underneath their far arm with your arm, and you sort of got your side on their chest and you're holding their other arm. It's a classic position. Where in judo, you would give up the arm, the underhook, and just wrap the head. And Ronda Rousey famously would attack with this position, and so did Josh Barnett. And he found himself in this position with this jiu-jitsu guy, Dean Lister, who hadn't been submitted for years. The thing was that Josh Barnett wasn't a jiu-jitsu guy. He was this catch wrestler, and he had a really crushing top pressure from this position. He was able to deliver so much pressure and force on Dean Lister, they actually submitted from what is not traditionally, you might argue, a submission hold. But the fact is, Barnett's crushing pressure made it a submission hold. And it's a little bit different. You're probably less likely to get submitted by a jiu-jitsu guy in this position because they don't really look to submit there. They look to control that position and then move to a more dominant position for submission. But catch wrestler has a whole different philosophy from this position. And the fact that he was able to submit Dean Lister just shows the amount of pressure, crushing pressure. And anytime you see someone using that sort of crushing pressure to demoralize and essentially in this situation submit their opponent, then you're looking at that sort of tiger crushing heavy element. Now, moving on, we'll look at Snake versus the Leopard example. And for this one, we look at Snake as being subtle, has a subtle control. Now, the Gracie family are sort of the royal family of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, if you like. And for many years, the best proponent of jiu-jitsu in their ranks was Rickson Gracie. He's a bit of an older guy now, but he was very, very famous, very, very slick, very smooth style. But he developed an idea which was called invisible jiu-jitsu, I believe it was called. And it was exactly this idea as we're talking about with Snake. It was the subtle control. You can't really see what he was doing. He was just nullifying his opponent's movement, their offense, purely with this subtle control. So he wasn't being fast, he wasn't being particularly crushing and aggressive or explosive. He was just able to control his opponent's hips, to control what they do so they weren't able to attack him so effectively, and he was able to just kind of control anything that they were looking to do. And so when you look at him rolling with people, obviously this was later in his life, but he was a little bit older at this point, you can see that he's not doing anything particularly flash, but then you hear the people which are very, very well respected who are rolling with him, they're just like, I couldn't get anything going. His control was so subtle, but so refined, it really shut down my offense. So that really, and he was obviously very famous for his submissions as well. He'd slide from one submission to another, triangle, armbar, triangle, and so on. And again, it's this subtle control that he was able to put on it. He's been literally doing jiu-jitsu since he was 1-2 years old. He was born into it, and probably the smoothest proponent of it you'd ever seen. Now, another great jiu-jitsu guy which really emphasizes the leopard element for me is a guy called Jacare. He grappled many times with Roger Gracie over the years, and they had a bit of a rivalry going. Now, Jacare is really great grappler, one of the best to ever do it. But what really makes him stand out, especially in his younger career, was his sort of explosiveness, his just pure athleticism, really. But he was able to rotate one way and rotate another way incredibly quickly. He'd shoot takedowns very effectively as well. And so when I think of him, I just think explosiveness, especially when he was young. He's still competing now in MMA, I believe. If we're going back to a sort of mid-20s to 30s, grappling in the gi or no gi, you're thinking Jacare, he's got this explosiveness. He's got this explosive passing from one way to the other. It's very lateral, great to watch, very, very entertaining. And he really, as I say, emphasizes that ability to laterally attack the opponent using combination attacks, explosive double legs, takedowns, combination passing. Really, really does the job. If you want to go back and look at two different styles, Rickson Gracie is one with this invisible jiu-jitsu, this subtle control, and Jacare with this explosive technique. So the final one for the examples is Monkey versus Mantis. So for Monkey, we're obviously looking at these escapes, these back takes, scrambles, rolling, inverted guard retention for agility, tricky, vertical, lateral circles we didn't really mention. Instead of going up and down left and right, they're kind of doing a combination of those things. So if you think tiger and crane are very vertical, leopard and snake very lateral, looking to kind of get on the ends of your opponent. Monkey is this spiraling effect, it's up and down and left and right. And when we think of someone who's, obviously monkey is a very grappling aspect when we think of this agility based, but I could only go with one guy really, and that's Marcelo Garcia. Marcelo Garcia is arguably one of the greatest, or he's arguably the greatest grappler ever. Gordon Ryan winning recently, Abu Dhabi, is kind of taking over that argument. But Marcelo was a smaller guy. He really revolutionized certain aspects of jiu-jitsu, taking the back and finishing with chokes from the back. He really took that to a whole new level. And big aspect of monkey is this sort of inverting and the rolling and the taking of the back as well. So when you watch him grapple and take the back and finish with submission, there is a very monkey aspect to the way he moves, the way he approaches it. Just his whole deadliness from that position really just makes you think of the agile monkey. He also attacked front chokes and guillotines and all sorts of stuff in a very unbalancing way. So monkey, Marcelo Garcia. There's a great video on YouTube, like Marcelo Garcia highlights. It's almost like you're watching a monkey in a human form. He's unbelievable, brilliant. So the final aspect is Keenan Cornelius as like a proponent of Mantis. In that sense, is because he kind of developed this style of the worm guard. It's very strange, very interesting innovation, and if you've played against someone who's applying that, it's very different, so it's difficult to combat. And obviously he came up with this new method of attack. He was quite successful with it, and it's quite fascinating to watch him do that. He's got very long limbs, very interesting style, and he's obviously very, very good, but his development of the worm guard really stuck out to me as someone who is using something strange, some strange innovation to get something working. Is attacking your opponent's limbs, controlling them with the gi, but also using your own limbs as offense. So we could have chosen a lot of different people for that Mantis aspect, but I thought I'd go with Keenan. Again, these 6 people which have sort of exemplify these animal aspects, these strategies, if you like. So that's Josh Barnett with the crushing tiger, Roger Gracie with the submission defense and defensively minded crane, Rickson Gracie as the invisible control of invisible jiu-jitsu and snake, the explosive gifts and technique of Jacare for leopard, the escapes, back takes, rolling and inversions and guard retention of monkey for Marcelo Garcia, and finally Keenan Cornelius's Mantis innovation, strange innovation at that, of the worm guard and so forth. So that really covers what I wanted to talk about both the 5-element theory and the 7-animal theory, looking at grappling to kind of work as an addendum to the striking podcast. So as we look to wrap up this episode, I just wanted to cover some common tactics which really apply well to both striking and grappling. These are good aspects to think about, or concepts to think about if you're yourself training or you're beginning to train, and these are ideas to keep in mind which will help you progress in your path to becoming a martial arts expert and so on and so forth. So these are basic conceptual ideas, as I say. So first one is high and low, or vice versa, low and high. So this is a typical thing for striking and grappling. We can focus our attention on a high part of our opponent, the head. Do this by jabbing to the head over and over again, jabbing to the head, jabbing to the head, jabbing to the head, to draw their eye, to distract them, and then land a heavy shot to the body, vice versa. You can do this with kicks, punches, and so on, but also in a grappling sense. More in grappling, it could be maybe to get a grip on our opponent. If we're using the gi, the kimono, maybe we can fake a collar grip, and then reach down and pick up a leg and look to take our opponent down, and so on and so forth. This very basic idea to attack high to set up the low, or to attack low to set up the high. But these are one of those conceptual ideas that as we get more and more advanced, will apply more and more, and it's basically testing our opponent's defensive skills. And if we obviously just go for what we're going for over and over and over, we only get so much success. But we have to have a bit of trickery. We have to use a bit of savviness to get what we want. It could be a collar grip, it could be landing a good clean shot to our opponent's solar plexus, or it could be, taking them down with a single leg attack or a trip or something. So high and low, or vice versa, is one common tactic. You can also see this with kicks low and then sail high and with a knockout. Lots of examples in fights where that's happening. An idea which is related to that is the center versus the edge. And it's interesting how it works with battlefield tactics. Obviously, if you're attacking an army, it's so you can attack the edge, you can attack the center, you can look to, envelop your opponent and all this sort of stuff. But obviously, one-on-one, these things sort of apply too. So we could attack the center, work up around the edges. So a classic one in boxing is we could look to attack the center to set up shots to the body, round the side to the liver and spleen. And the opposite is also the case. We could also try and pepper the rib cage on both sides, making our opponent really favor those parts of the body to defend themselves, and then we shoot that shot right through the center, land to the solar plexus, and wind our opponent and take them out. The same can apply with grappling. Again, we're looking to pass the guard to the left, we're looking to pass the guard to the right, and then we might look to cut right through the middle. So it's a very basic idea, as with the high-low, but it comes back to this idea that we can't just keep hammering at a closed door and expect to get success. We need to set ourselves up. We need to convince our opponent of defending one particular part. We call it doors. There's only so many doors you can cover if you're being asked to defend yourself. You've got to pepper your opponent's defenses, and one way to do it is with the high-low. Another way is to do through the center and around the edges. And this kind of goes into the idea of the direct versus the indirect. Some people, some approaches, they're just going to come with all that force at a direct approach. There's no trickiness. They're just going to come with power. They've got maybe a strength advantage, and they're going to blast that double leg, or they're going to throw heavy power punches, and they don't care if you block it, thinking tiger. Whereas the indirect approach could be attacking someone's collar to set up a choke and spell up to do this, but really the whole time you were looking to get a wrist control grip. You could go straight from the wrist control, straight for it if you're attacking someone. But the indirect approach is this kind of layered setup approach. And that really is, from my view, the difference a lot of the time between Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So Japanese seems to be much more direct in their approach culturally in a lot of ways, whereas Brazil, there's that kind of flamboyance, that trickery. If you think of capoeira, how Brazil play football, they use a lot of indirect means, tricky, whereas Japanese martial arts especially, and even the approach of a samurai, it's very much, I've got a well engineered blade and I'm going to go direct to my opponent. So there's this idea of direct versus indirect means to do what I want to do. There's that trickery, and then there's that straight ahead methodology of combat, be it striking or grappling. So those are three ideas: high and low, and vice versa. We got the center and we have the edges, attacking those to find gaps. We've got the direct versus the indirect. So if you have been training for some time, or you're looking to get into training, these are well worth thinking about, because these are sort of the areas where we can make big improvements. The next one is tempo changes. And when we're a beginning student in grappling or in striking, maybe we don't think about this so much, but when you're sparring with someone and they're going at the same speed, they're doing everything at the same speed, we can start to kind of get into their rhythm. It gets a lot more difficult when you're dealing with someone who is constantly changing their tempo. They're setting you up to go at a certain speed, you're reacting to them, but then they change up on you. They're constantly changing speed, as well as doing these other ones above. You know, they're attacking high, they're attacking low, they're attacking the center, they're coming around the edges. They're using both direct and indirect approaches. Plus, they're changing their tempo. They're feinting. They're going this way, they're going that way. They're getting you kind of very unsure about what you're doing, and confusing your opponent is one of the great gifts of what you can apply to martial arts. And you know, going back through the art of war, never be doing what your opponent thinks you're doing or wants you to do. Always be doing something else. You know, changing tempo, doing things slightly unorthodox. These can all help us when we're dealing with against someone who may be more experienced. They might have physical advantages on us. But if we can apply these common tactics, we can kind of get the better of people which maybe are more experienced and do have these physical gifts over us by applying these classic common tactics from both striking and grappling. Next one I mentioned previously as well is feinting. There is a move in the style of Kung Fu that I practice called Ghost Lord Fanning. It's a great pictorial representation, because the Ghost Lord, the ghost means it's not real. It's a feint. It's not a real attack. But a Lord Fanning is making a big show. A Lord doesn't walk through or do anything. They do it with a lordly manner. So it's got a certain performance about it. So Ghost Lord Fanning is obviously, this is a Chinese martial art I practice, so those oriental fans. But when you do a feint, it can't be overly subtle, because it's not going to get the response you're looking for. If you're going to act lordly, it's going to be big, it's going to have a certain posture, you're going to have a certain play at what you're doing. Now, it kind of leads into these indirect versus direct, and it applies to the high and low, or the center versus the edge, because if you feint to the high with a big showy move and then attack low, or the opposite, you attack to the center with a big showy move with good form and grace, and then land round the edge. And we're using that sort of direct versus indirect as well. It really sets things up, and you will find some people will be practicing martial arts for many years, and they will just constantly just have that direct approach. They will never use those feints. They will never invest in those, be it striking, be it grappling, and they'll plateau. They'll only reach a certain level. Whereas, you know yourself, if you're dealing with someone who you can't quite get a grip on, you can't quite get a beat on their tempo or what they're trying to do, because they're effectively feinting, they're going one way, they're going the other way, you don't really know what you're dealing with. It's like if you're playing poker against an opponent and you really haven't not got any clue about what they are up to, then you're at a disadvantage, aren't you? So, Ghost Lord Fanning, effective feinting. And the final common tactic as we wrap up episode 9 of the Druid High Performance podcast is open versus closed stances engagement. Now, not to get into the weeds too much, open versus closed stance. So if I'm stood with my left foot forward and my opponent is in the same stance with their left foot forward, we are in a closed stance engagement. There is no clear opening, because we're both in the same position. So when we're coming to attack each other with strikes, my lead shoulder is protecting my chin, and same for my opponents. Now, if we're in an open stance engagement, say I'm in the left foot forward sort of orthodox position and my opponent is in a southpaw position, then we're in a different engagement, and as each of us are in a more open stance. I've got more chance to land my straight right hand down the center, but they've also got the opportunity to land the left straight through my guard. Also, when we're in this open stance engagement, both myself in the orthodox stance and my opponent in the southpaw stance have a body kick. The middle kick with our rear leg is available, because if we're in the closed stance, if you can picture it, if I throw that kick, there's a lot of arm and shoulder and elbow in the way, whereas in the open side engagement, there's a lot less bone, there's a lot less in the way. Now, if you're not trained particularly much in martial arts, you'd think, how much does it even become a factor? Well, it will, because in striking, different things are available to you as a practitioner in the open stance engagement, but you are open to those as well. Now, when it comes to the grappling, if I'm shooting double legs, single legs, these sorts of things, it matters how my opponent stands. And so certain things are taken away and certain things are available just in the way that we stand. And a lot of styles, they ask for you to stand in just one stance. But as an approach to self-development and mastery, some styles practice being adept in both styles and reacting to your opponent as if they switch to counter your stance too. And you'll see this with certain strikers, you'll see this with certain grapplers. They have a game on one side in the engagement of stances and they have a game on the other side. Now, it might be you'd spend 15, 20 years training a martial art but wouldn't even consider switching stances, whereas just having that extra ability to work off another stance is useful. And it's an interesting way to take your training if you feel like you've plateaued to a certain level, because it's going to be very difficult to be as good as you are in one stance as the other. But we all want challenges, don't we? And you'll notice certain people are able to perform well out of both stances, be it grappling, be it striking. And obviously we're talking about martial arts for self-defense and self-development, very important. And what better way to continue your development as a martial artist by being able to work off of both stances and attack and defend. Very important to be able to defend in how these stances engage. So, as I say, just a brief look at some common tactics for both striking and grappling. This probably could have been a much more exhaustive list, but I'm aware that time is moving on. So, to reiterate, high and low and vice versa. Center and round the edges, around the sides is number 2. Number 3, direct versus indirect. Number 4, tempo changes. Number 5, ghost lord fanning, feinting, faking, the ability to trick your opponent into thinking you're doing a certain thing, but you're actually not. And the final piece of the puzzle is this open versus closed stance engagement. So if you are interested in training in martial arts, I hope this podcast has given you a little bit of extra oomph to get on and give it a crack. If you are more interested in the striking aspect, so be it. The previous podcast is about striking. This one, as I say, is a bit more about grappling. I would urge people which have only done grappling or only done the striking to try at least the other side of martial arts. Don't have to kind of pour yourself into it potentially, but it's worth knowing. I've been doing striking for 20 years, grappling for about 7-8 years, so I still consider myself more of a striker than a grappler. But I'm very thankful for the time that I've been practicing grappling and the skills I've learned, because it's a very different style, a very different method. Grappling is sort of endless. Striking is not so deep in technique, I would say. It's more, it's difficult to say. There's so many different aspects to grappling which aren't part of striking, but I guess there is a vice versa. There's a counter to that as well. So having experience of both of them, I think, is incredibly important. As I say, we're treating martial arts not just as self-defense and as combat, but also as an avenue of self-development. And I think both striking and grappling give you so much. They give you belief, they give you confidence, they give you an embodiness which you just wouldn't have without them. And they really are one of the key skills that we should all really, in my opinion, invest in. But that's my opinion. If you're ever thought about taking up martial arts and are looking to do so but don't really know where to go with that, drop a message down in the comments. But one thing I would say to you is give it a shot. It's been a big impact on my life and I wouldn't change it for the world. So we'll wrap it up there. So that's Drew signing off for the Druid High Performance podcast. It's been a great little episode. I very much enjoyed this one. And please like, subscribe and share with anyone you know who might find this interesting. And if you are thinking to sign up to a martial arts class, give it a go. And if you're based in London, drop me a comment. Where I'm based in southeast London near Deptford, near the river. And happy to share any of the skills that I've learnt with anyone who's interested in starting their own martial arts journey. So This is Drew signing off for Druid High Performance Podcast Episode 9. I'll see you in the next episode. Drew signing off.